3, 2, 1, and go.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Force podcast, a podcast from three Puerto Rican friends coming together to do deep dives into Star Wars and other nerd-related media. This is Season 3, Episode 3, and in honor of Star Wars Podcast Day 2022, we're going to go back to the films. Now, I don't know if you remember, but way back in Season 1, we had started talking about the different films within the trilogy and their place. And we started with the first of each trilogy, and today we're going to be talking about the middle films. Attack of the Clones, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Last Jedi.
Last Jedi.
And not only about the films themselves, but the place within the Star Wars universe as a whole and what they mean for the hero's journey and all of that fun stuff. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because, and it's just my opinion, 2 of these films are the best within their trilogy and 1 is the worst. So I guess we'll get to that. But before we start talking about Star Wars films, Goose, why don't you tell us a little bit about Star Wars Podcast Day 2022?
Star Wars Podcast Day. Interesting. Thanks for letting me talk about something that I actually only recently learned about. I was on the Twitters a couple of weeks ago, and I saw our friends from 50 Minutes had shared that they were participating in Star Wars Podcast Day. And just a small aside, last week, we had Andres from 60 Minutes to join us to talk about the Book of Boba Fett for a fantastic conversation. So if you haven't checked that out, please make sure to check it out. It was a great conversation. Good friends of the channel. Anyway, so I saw what they were participating in Star Wars Podcast Day, and I asked them a little bit about it, and they said they had participated the year before and gave me the information. I thought it was kind of a good thing, right? Because it's like, hey, we're a community, and all podcasts have to kind of support each other and like be positive and contribute to each other's success. So I reached out to the podcast group that is doing it, and they let me know that Podcast Day is to celebrate, Star Wars podcasts, as the name would indicate, but it is chosen to be on February 7th because, and this is what I did not know, it's the 23rd anniversary of Jedi Talk, which is one of the first, if not the first, Star Wars podcast, and it premiered February 7th, 1999. 1999, the year that the Phantom Menace came out. So apparently, and the internet did its big boom. So it seems like appropriate to celebrate podcasts on a day when the first Star Wars podcast came out. So a couple of other podcasts, I mean, it's more than a couple, it's a couple dozen, I think, at this point, are coming together to celebrate that day and just, celebrate Star Wars as a whole. So yeah, that's it. Hashtag Star Wars Podcast Day 2022.
Wow, it's amazing. We've grown so far. I really had no idea podcasts even existed in 1999.
Neither did I. I thought it was just message rooms back then.
Yeah, so.
There's something new every day.
Nerds find a way.
Yeah, thank you for those the OG nerds that set up
the OG nerd. Yeah. Wherever you are, thank you.
Thank you. The proto nerd.
The proto nerd. Yeah. and yeah, think about it. It's come so far, right? From one podcast in 1999, which who knew how many people were listening to it, because we didn't have Podchasers back then. So it's like, how the hell did you find it? How the hell did you listen to it? You have to wait 2 hours for your dial-up connection to download the episode to be able to hear a very crappy, very compressed audio file. And from that to what we have now, which is like hundreds, if not thousands, of Star Wars podcasts engaged in community through like all different, social medias, from Twitter to YouTube to Facebook to Instagram. It's a wild ride how Star Wars has grown. So for everyone that keeps saying that Disney's killing Star Wars, it's not. Star Wars is alive. It's thriving. It's beautiful. It's bigger than ever. It's going to keep growing, and it's going to keep getting better. We're living in the golden age of Star Wars.
Golden age of Star Wars. Star Wars Renaissance.
The Beskar age, if I were to make it a Star Wars appropriate.
I like that. The Beskar age. Well, anyway, Star Wars films. That's what started it all.
Spoiler alert, the worst one is not The Last Jedi for everybody.
Yeah.
The Last Jedi is I don't know if the best yet. I still think we need to give it a couple of years to age to then compare it to The Empire Strikes Back. but it's definitely up there in movies, Star Wars movies that have the biggest impact and the biggest quality and the best filmmaking and the best story. I mean, it's the movie that I don't want to make this a Last Jedi centric episode, but it had a big impact, I think, and it shook up the foundations of Star Wars and kind of reinvigorated the franchise in a way that we still have yet to see some other media do with that as impact that it has had. But yeah, that's one thing we can say, at least I think positively, about all three of the middle films of the trilogies, is that they all tried to redefine their saga in a way that, to lesser or more success, impacted the Star Wars going forward. Because Empire did it. Empire's like the cliche film of movies going dark and reinventing what a saga, how middle chapters are. And then obviously Attack of the Clones did it in its own kind of neo-noir, colorful CGI apotheosis of of excess. It's very Baroque in that sense, right? And to lesser degrees or more degree, depending on who you're asking, it changed Star Wars, because it defined what Star Wars was going forward, especially when we look at it in the face of the Clone Wars animated series and then Revenge of the Sith. So it's interesting what all these middle films have done for the saga. But why don't we start with kind of the first one chronologically, right? Because if we're talking about the journey, we have to talk about the journey from its inception. And I think it makes sense. Last time when we were talking about the first ones of the trilogy, we started with Phantom Menace.
Yep.
Right? So I think it's appropriate to start with Attack of the Clones, which, is, for better or for worse, a movie.
It is a movie.
It's a movie. Sorry, prequel babies. Technically, Mo and I are prequel babies. Nani, you not so much. You're like a prequel prepubescent, not a baby. You were almost there.
A prequel twin.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I remember when Attack of the Clones came out, it blew my goddamn mind. But then again, I was very impressionable back then. But Nani, what did you think of Attack of the Clones back in the day?
Yeah, well, when Attack of the Clones came out, I was already in college. So yeah, I'm definitely not a prequel baby. I remember that Phantom Menace was kind of boring to me when it came out. And then I was really excited about this one.
You've changed your mind though.
I have changed my mind. I love the Phantom Menace. But I was more excited than when Attack of the Clones came out, because I remember, you grow up and you hear so much about the Clone Wars, and you never get to see the Clone Wars ever. So it's really, really exciting. And then we get this movie and there's no Clone Wars.
Well, begun the Clone Wars have them.
Yeah, I know, but that's it. If it hadn't been for the animated series, we would have never gotten to see what actually happened in the Clone Wars. It was just kind of the beginning and then the end, but we don't get to see a lot of the battles and a lot of the fun things that happen. So thanks, Filoni, for the animated series.
Well, George Lucas. That was George Lucas' baby.
Of course, I know.
That was his. And then he handed it off to the heir apparent, Filoni. So give credit where credit's due. George Lucas messed up a lot of things, but he is the originator of the Clone Wars.
And one of the things that he really, really did mess up was the dialogue in Attack of the Clones, which was terrible, flat, hard to follow. It's cringy. It was bad. And I remember being mad at Hayden Christensen. Obviously, it wasn't his fault, but when you're watching movies for the first time, it's like, wow, this guy's like really bad. But then you really think about it, and you have Natalie Portman, who I think is an amazing actress, and she tried, but it was so bad. So bad. That love story is so hard to accept because it was just so badly written that tragedy's coming and all this stuff, but it's hard to get yourself into it because it's
which could have worked. It's a love story that
it's interesting because now somebody explained it. Not she only wanted a fuck boy. That's it, and that was Anakin. Like,
that's the scientific term.
And that's what happened. That's why it's not a real love story. It's just a fuck.
I think it's in how it's framed. The problem is, I'm not a master of love or anything here, but based on like how love in other films is framed, especially like in a war movie like this or a mystery movie like this, it has to like come out of adversity, and we don't kind of feel that she looks to him for support or vice versa, so that something flourishes from like the inherent danger that they're in, or the plot kind of forces them to be together in a way. I mean, you could argue it, right? But it just feels forced. It doesn't feel like it's blooming as it does in Last Jedi, and most definitely Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's because George Lucas has never talked to a person before, or we know Carrie Fisher was a script doctor for Attack of the Clones, so we don't know if like he just did not listen to her when she was trying to tell him how love works. But yeah, I definitely feel that the relationship between the two of them is lacking because of the weird interactions with them. And the thing about Attack of the Clones that I think is really interesting is that when you look at it as a whole and you kind of take away the movie, right? And you and look at the themes and the things that happen, it's a really good, interesting story. And like all the pieces are there for it to have been in terms of cinematic quality. We can get into like the themes a little later, especially when we're comparing them to Empire and Last Jedi. But there's a lot of really good stuff in there of what George Lucas wanted to inject into that movie. It's just that the execution falls flat, at least for me, a little bit. I've learned to appreciate it more as time has gone by, obviously. But it's still, for me, definitely the weakest of the prequel trilogy, for sure. Even though there's a lot to love in it and a lot to learn to love, but it's still, it's still a lot of things that don't work for me. Mo, what did you think though? You're the bendo usually between like Nani and I. You're the one in the middle. So
Well, it's interesting because I have to separate my initial viewing.
mhm.
When I first saw it in theaters, I was a youngling, and it's a completely different experience. I was like, oh, this is such a cool. I remember my dad being like, wow, what a waste of money.
That's a horrible thing to say to a child that just loved the movie.
I mean, you know,
You're like, I loved it. It's horrible. Whoa.
shit, that's your opinion.
Exactly.
But as with age, then you start seeing, okay, there's a reason why my dad said,
Your dad said that.
Yeah.
It's like Nani was saying, like, I think they had all the ideas out there, but there was no like well done execution of those ideas. And I think if any from the prequels, this one seems to be like the most unhinged.
That's a word.
It's almost like nobody told George, like, you shouldn't do that, or
yeah, like reel it in.
like just went all out. There was a lot of interesting concepts, like, you bring back like cloning and
Yeah.
What's the impact on Star Wars, because at this moment we all know cloning exists, but what was the impact on it? Like that call back to like that first scene from A New Hope, like, oh yeah, I fought in the Clone Wars with your father, and now we're actually seeing like the actual scenes of like Anakin and Obi-Wan going through the Clone Wars. But the story, how it's played out, it's just doesn't work. Like it's not believable. I mean, and I get it, sci-fi is not supposed to be believable, but it's not grounded. It's there's a lack of cohesion, if that makes sense. Like, you start
feels
with,
artificial sometimes too.
Everything feels artificial, like from how it's like portrayed portrayed, how everything is like the story's developed, and it's not believable. That's what's sad
Mm-hmm.
about it. That it's not a believable story. There's not much. There's a lot of things, but it's just like thrown in your face, and you're supposed to figure out. And that's what the series did in a way, like
Mm-hmm.
sort out like everything that was thrown at us and like make it
Mm-hmm.
believable and make the
Mhm.
stories flesh out and understand what the Clone Wars were all about.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's supposed to be the turning, like it's supposed to be that introduction of like Anakin turning into Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it's shown, it's almost like Anakin is just like a child. It's
Yeah.
still a child that, and it makes sense, you know. The, Anakin got picked up when he was a kid, had no parents. Probably Obi-Wan did a horrible job at raising him. Just like, you know, I'm just a big bro for you, but I'm not gonna teach
Be
you
a
and parent you
parental
through.
figure. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, Padme, come on, you have like you were a queen, and you're a senator, and you're okay with
Mm-hmm. And you're
marrying
Natalie Portman.
a
Yeah.
genocidal kid? Like, seriously? Like, red
Yeah.
flags all around. Like, come
Yeah.
on.
Not only genocidal, but he
Mhm.
basically just stalked her and like beat her into submission to be with. It's like at the end, it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
didn't fall in love with you. I just gave up. You know, and it's so it's it's so
Yeah.
just
It's not Stockholm syndrome exactly,
it's,
but it's you know, there's something of it to say. But Mo, you were mentioning something that I think is very interesting, and I think it's about the trilogy structure as a whole that kind of forces Attack of the Clones to be where it is, as opposed to like the storytelling in it, which is something that happened with the sequel trilogy, I think. And looking back at the sequel trilogy, a lot of the complaints that people have, myself included, is that we didn't really get a lot of context towards that galactic conflict between the First Order and the Resistance, because last time we saw the Empire, it was defeated, and all of a sudden when Force Awakens starts, it's like, oh, what's this First Order? Where did it start with? And and Force Awakens didn't really do a good job at establishing a lot of those things of the conflict that then Last Jedi kind of has to do a lot of heavy lifting to then like kind of establish, to like make sure that the conflict is there, so that then there's a resolution to be had at episode 9. And I think the same thing happens in the prequel trilogy. Like the Phantom Menace is so kind of isolated in its story of like what it happens within itself, with just, you know, Naboo and the pod race. That's basically Phantom Menace. That then it kind of forces Attack of the Clones to rush through everything, and just like, okay, we have to get to the Clone Wars because that's what's established in episode 4, so we have to get there so that then we can have a resolution in episode 3. So it was a movie that was forced to be where it's at, I think, and especially like when you frame it that way. And I compare a lot. Then I think that in that sense, Attack of the Clones has that symmetry with The Last Jedi, where they both feel in a sense like they're the first film of the trilogy, because they are the first films that are tackling the conflict properly, you know. Where in Force Awakens, you did Starkiller Base and you did all these things, but it didn't feel like the movie had started. It felt like a prelude to the conflict between First Order and Resistance. And I feel like same thing happens with the prequels. The Phantom Menace is kind of like a prelude, and then Attack of the Clones is kind of like, okay, this is when like everything starts now. So, which doesn't really happen in the original trilogy. The original trilogy kind of have like a good flow of events that we can discuss the merits of the resolution and Return of the Jedi if we ever get to do an episode on the final three movies. But in that sense, that the original trilogy is still more cohesive in terms of establishing a conflict and resolving it, and developing and resolving it, than the prequels or the sequels. What do you
Of
think,
course
Nani?
they did, because they thought they were only going to get A New Hope. So they had
True.
to have a film in itself and establish that conflict, because you were going to get one movie. So when you start planning a trilogy, that's the problem. Before you get started, you have to figure out where each one is going to be. And because you know that there's more coming, maybe you don't establish as much in that first one because you're gonna, you know, you have more opportunities to do it further on, but that doesn't necessarily always work. And then the problem with Attack of the Clones, that it's supposed to be the one that first really establishes this conflict, because it's not grounded in anything really. You're doing the steps of how we get to the Clone Wars. It's supposed to feel threatening and scary and, you know, tense, and you don't get any of that. I mean, you know that the Clone Wars is coming, and but there's no real anticipation for it. You know, you don't feel, you know, like you're in the story that much, and that you're afraid of what's going to happen and how are we actually going to get to the Clone Wars, you know? Like that one scene when you start seeing the armies and everything rise up, like it's like the only scene that you're like, wow, that was like, that made my heart beat faster. But that was it. You have an entire movie trying to establish a love story that makes no sense, to establish the beginning of a war that is, they're coming at it from so many different angles. Halfway through the movie, you don't really know what's going on. I do really love the whole Camino arc, just because we did get that glorious planet, and not just the concept of the cloning and everything, but it's kind of that the detective mystery thing, like what's happening. It's a planet that's not supposed to exist, and you know, Obi-Wan's journey, and you know, so it felt like Obi-Wan had more of a journey than Anakin, and this is supposed to be more about Anakin than Obi-Wan. So,
but that's a good point, because what I was thinking about while you were saying that is that you're absolutely right, in the sense that the movie wants to be mysterious and kind of have like this grand explosion of reveals, and then, oh shit, the Clone Wars, but it never pulls the trigger on mystery and like this whole neo-noir stuff, or like Obi-Wan is a detective trying to figure out this mystery. It's kind of undone by the fact that we already know from the beginning who did it. Now you show Jango Fett, you show like the assassination attempt. So like everything that he's trying to figure out, we as an audience already know. And I think it would have been way more effective if we didn't know who was doing like the attack, the assassination attempt on Padme. And then once he finally uncovers, like maybe he just found the dart thing when he goes to Dex. It's just like, oh wait, who did it? But we never see the bounty hunters. We only see Sam Wessel. We never see Jango at all. And then like it's just like a big. And maybe I'm misremembering Attack of the Clones, and maybe this is exactly how it happened. Did we ever see Jango before? Oh no, we do, because he gives Sam the worms.
Yeah.
And he talks to her, so we do see him.
Yeah,
okay,
we do see.
I was
Django,
like, wait, maybe I'm misremembering how I remember it, and the way I'm trying to to propose it is the way it actually happened. Okay, thank you. But yeah, so when he finally discovers Camino, that's when we see Jango for the first time. It's like, oh crap, and then everything starts falling into pieces. But the mystery isn't there because we are already shown the answers to everything. And this is not a prequel problem, because not because we know what's going to happen in the original trilogy doesn't mean that you can't create an effective storytelling device where there's still surprises in it. It's just the structure of the movie that just decides to gives us, you know, it just shows us everything to begin with. And I think that's, you know, a big problem. I think that Count Dooku is kind of like a lame villain, because you kind of wasted Darth Maul, and maybe Darth Maul should have kept being like that villain in this movie. But I still think Count Dooku thematically still works for Anakin, because it talks about the corruption of the Jedi and Jedi losing their way, which is what's happening to Anakin. Each of the villains, right, in the trilogy speaks to one part of Anakin's journey to, you know, in his descent towards the dark side. But I don't know, in terms of like the movie, like it's that's the problem. The themes are there, and it's all interesting when we talk about it. And the execution is just like, okay. What are you gonna say, Mo?
No, like I wonder if, because I don't think there's something inherently wrong in knowing, like being an omniscient viewer. I mean, we already know what's gonna happen at the end of the day. Like we've seen the outcome of this whole prequel trilogy. Like we know what eventually will happen. I think it's the fact that, you know, they didn't they didn't flesh it out. Like what were the implications? Like what if we had like a scene where Anakin and Dooku were actually talking, like not
Mhm.
fighting, but like actually putting the seeds of like that insecurity, that probably
Mhm.
like eventual hatred towards the Jedi Order.
Like that
Uh,
scene with Anakin, but instead of that scene with Obi-Wan, but instead of Obi-Wan, it's Anakin. Yeah.
right. Or even
Mhm.
that scene from the Clone Wars show, that when Yoda goes into like uh, going through his journey and then finds like Dooku and talks to Dooku like on the Jedi Temple, and it seems like everything is like fine, like everything's back to normal. There's no sense of like urgency pulling Anakin towards the dark side. It's
Mhm.
just it's just the, oh no, you're not supposed to follow your feelings, ergo you're gonna go to the dark side.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's not fleshed out in any way. There's no real conflict for Anakin to be like, oh wait, I'm ambivalent of what's happening. It's almost like, oh, just because you forced me not to be with my feelings, then I'm gonna be turned to the dark side. There's
Mhm.
no like journey for Anakin being trying to try both at the same time.
Mhm.
It doesn't happen. I mean, I think they try to do that with like, oh, Anakin has like a hidden relationship with Padme, and that's the trying to be a Jedi and have feelings, but it's not presented in the way that Anakin is going through that
Mhm.
journey. It's almost like, oh yeah, it's gonna happen. It's inevitable. You will turn to Darth Vader, and we'll just
Yeah.
use this plot, a couple of plot lines. We'll show you killing all the Tuscans and
Right.
be angry, and that's gonna be your entry to the dark side.
Which I think is an extremely good point, especially when we look at it in terms of like the hero's journey, right? With Joseph Campbell, and everyone's curious about what that is. We had a wonderful conversation with Ty Black back in season one, where we talked about the hero's journey and Star Wars, and then talked about the hero's journey in The Mandalorian. Then obviously tried to frame that when we were comparing the first three films. But when we talk about the hero's journey, like right, like when this is the second part of the story, so it's supposed to be the dark one. It's technically called the initiation, when right now Anakin is in the road of trials. But the road of trials doesn't really work for his character development if we don't know what he went through before. Like we don't really see thematically Anakin crossing any thresholds or rejecting the call to be a hero, because spoiler alert, Anakin is not the protagonist of the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
No one is. It's like it's
Yeah.
a toss up between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Padme, depending on like what's happening. Sometimes Anakin, but like there's no one protagonist in the movie for us to like describe their journey in one movie, and much less the three movies, because it's like, oh, it's a couple of people in episode one, and then all of a sudden episodes two and three, okay, now it's about Anakin. So technically we never had, at least in my opinion, right, we never saw like the first part of Anakin's hero's journey. We never had, like I said, he never refused a call. He always dreamed of like not being a slave. But then again, if you're a slave, who doesn't dream of not being a slave?
Yeah.
So like there wasn't like anything there to establish his place where he is now. The only thing that is established from the previous movie is that he misses his mom, which rightfully so, because attachment. But otherwise, like it doesn't really follow the structure of what we've been accustomed to in the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. So in that sense, and I don't want to like stop talking about Attack of the Clones, but since we're talking about mythological structures that have worked, Empire Strikes Back does a fantastic job with it, because then we take where Luke was, which is like the ending of A New Hope, which technically is like the initiate. What is it? What the fuck? Let me check the Wikipedia real quick before I say it wrong. Oh, the departure. Sorry. And then the last part of his journey, when he destroys the Death Star, we could like based on the journey, it's called the belly of the whale. And the belly of the whale is the final separation of the hero's known world and the self. So when he destroys that Death Star, he finally separates himself from the boy from Tatooine and is finally confronting himself in this new world. And then what happens when we start with Empire Strikes Back? Luke is in a completely opposite world from the world that he started in. He was in an arid, hot, sand desert world of Tatooine. And all of a sudden, he starts in the cold, snowy, desolate world of Hoth. He's like in an inverted position where he has to like reckon with the things that he doesn't know. So visually, thematically, everything's working, right? For Luke's journey, especially when we look at it from that mythological point of view. So, well, why don't we start with you in terms of like Empire Strikes Back? Like, what were your impressions of Empire and how it works, right, in terms of Luke's journey, especially when we compare it to Anakin's in Attack of the Clones?
Interesting because on the flip side, when I first saw Empire as a child, I wasn't that impressed with the movie. It just I didn't thought it was a strong suit of the trilogy. It probably was like, oh, just the middle version of it. But then the more you grow into it, you start the fact that you finally get a movie where the good guys don't win. That's you end the movie with, I mean, albeit hopeful, it is a dark ending.
Yeah.
There's no in between. Like the bad guys and the Empire won. Like took out Han. The Luke lost a hand. The pretty much the whole rebellion is like scattered again, and the Empire is showing its strength. Like, oh, you blew up my Death Star? Then look, we still have a lot to offer. And when it comes to like Luke's journey, it's when you get like the descent. You actually get Luke to look in the mirror like that. I always that scene where Luke goes down into the swamp and meets Vader and breaks and then sees Luke's own face. I remember that scene has always like stuck with me. Like at first, at the beginning, I was like, "What the hell am I watching?" Because I couldn't like grasp like what was this like aiming at. And then, but then it's such a beautiful scene. It's dark, but doesn't mean that of darkness doesn't come like that knowledge. And I think that's like the difference between like Attack of the Clones and Empire, is that Empire embraces the inner darkness we all possess. Like even if we're going through that journey of betterment, we all have dark aspects of ourselves, of our journey. We all have things we don't like about ourselves. We all have things that others don't like about ourselves. So how do you end up reconciliating those facts and you being okay with it? And that's what we see. Like, you don't only see Luke descending, but also at the same time rebelling against Yoda and Obi-Wan. Like they're telling Luke like, hey, like do not give in to that attachment to your friends. Like you have to stay here and train, and still ways to learn. But to Luke, it's an easy decision. It's like, yeah, I'm not staying here. Like F that, I need to save my friends. And that's where you draw the parallels. Like, that's where you start seeing like perhaps Luke is going to the dark side because of those attachments. But it's the story, the way it's portrayed, it makes sense. It's not like Attack of the Clones where it's like, oh yeah, boom, dark side. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Like here you actually start seeing like that it comes to mind. The phrase that comes to mind is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's exactly what you see Luke going for. Like, is Luke going to create hell and eventually end up the same way as Darth Vader? We already saw the premonition. We already saw the descent and looking at the mirror of the self, which is interesting because there is an actual mirror on the Last Jedi. And there's
Yep.
but this is a mirror scene, like looking into and seeing yourself in the other. That is another sort of mirror. It's the spiritual mirror, the force mirror, whatever you want to call it. Like, so, and then you obviously taking apart the beautiful, beautiful reveal of like, Luke, I'm your father. Like, boom, like there's so much iconic scenes in this movie that transcends, and it's able to pace it so well, because not only did Luke understand that, wait, Vader is me and I can be Vader, but then all of a sudden the fact that if I want to defeat Vader, I also have to defeat my father in the process, and create what's the word? It's not fratricide, is
oh my god,
patricide.
Patricide, yeah.
Which is another mythological also like aspect of one's journey, like, and it ties to actually like a very like a story from the Buddha that says like, in order to transcend, you have to kill your parents, but it's not killing them in the physical. I mean, don't go out and kill your parents. That is not
Please
don't.
Disclaimer.
like,
Don't.
And if you do, don't blame us.
if you do not blame us. Like,
This is all allegorical.
but it's the allegory that you have to transcend those attachments that came from when you were being born and raised. And here you have a very similar case. Like, not only looking down and seeing, oh wait, I have the dark side in me as well. We all have the potential for it. But then facing the fact that, wait, the dark side is my father. So that completely transforms the journey, because now it doesn't go from like, oh, you just have to destroy the dark side. It's like, how do you go the next step? How do you save someone you love from the dark side? I think that's what sets this middle section for the journey so straightforward. It's like, now you have a beautiful conflict, because whatever decision Luke takes, it's based on love. But the outcome of love can be the dark side or the light side. It could be, or somewhere
because
in the middle.
it's selfless love as
It's
opposed to selfish love, like Anakin, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So that I now I think it's probably one of the most beautiful movies out there, and thematically, and put it into perspective, we get Boba for the first time.
Right. Which, some guy starring in some show, I think. Totally forgot about him.
And then now we have a whole show and thing about. So
which might or might not be about him. Depends on who you
Yeah, depends
you know
on
what? At this moment now, I want to see Luke meet Boba. And
I didn't want to do an aside, because it's dangerous when we do tangents. But since you brought it up, I saw a theory on I was gonna say Reddit, on Twitter. But now that you said that, I'm like, oh, apparently most gonna like this theory, because I did not like it. Apparently, like in the next episode, Grogu is going to choose to be with Mando, and then Luke's is gonna respect that decision and going to deliver him to Mando on Tatooine. And when he gets to Tatooine and he meets Boba and sees what's happening with the Pikes, he's going to join the fight to help Boba liberate Tatooine. I saw that. I'm like,
no, please no.
No.
Please no.
Please no. Please no. Please no.
Good.
But anyway,
that means we don't have to discuss it. So now, what do you
back
think
to
of
the
Empire?
Well, Empire works on so many levels, and I have to agree with Mo, because I was a kid when I saw it, so it was actually my least favorite, just because to me it was just so depressing.
Right.
I mean, the first one, they end in like victory, and then obviously Return has the Ewok. So when you're a kid, that's like usually your favorite one. It's like, woo, awesome. And then this one, I would sometimes like kind of want to skip it, because it is so sad, But I think I started really loving it when it was first re-released in the theaters. And I remember when I went to watch it and saw it for the first time in the big screen, I was like, this movie's amazing. And, you know, as you age, you appreciate it more and more, to the point that Empire is my favorite of all of them, all 9 films. I love The Last Jedi too, but I think Empire is still the best. We can wait and see how Last Jedi ages too. But Empire is
nostalgia, just, you know.
Yeah, but it's just, it's from the beginning. I mean, Hoth is such a stark planet to start it with. And you see that Luke is having trials right away, like right from the start, you know, almost dying, and then the Battle of Hoth, and then everything else that happens, the actual training with Yoda, going into the cave, the desperation that he has because it's like it's not going fast enough, and the lack of patience and all these things, and you see the actual conflict, which is why Attack of the Clones is so disappointing, because Attack of the Clones is about the man who eventually becomes one of the scariest people in the galaxy. Just by his name, just by his presence, everybody's terrified. And you don't explore that conflict at all. Like how he feels about possibly becoming dark side, like that conflict of attachment versus my Jedi training. You don't see any of that. It's like, I don't give a crap. I'm just going to stalk Padme. It doesn't matter the values that have been instilled in me. That never happens. But with Luke, who grew up knowing nothing about any of this, you can see him struggling with trying to choose his family over the training that is been told to him, that if he doesn't fulfill the training, things could actually get even worse. So you can actually see that conflict throughout the entire film, and how he's made this family, and how the family is more important than the training itself, even though he does fulfill his promise, and after he does go and finish his training. So it's way more compelling, and it does feel like this is the trials that he has to go through to eventually come out the other side. And then the character that we see, super badass when he first goes into Jabba's palace at the beginning of Return. And it's so much more compelling. The characters are so believable in this one, and it's not just Luke, it's Leia and Han and Chewbacca and everybody. I mean, you had already started to fall in love with the characters in A New Hope, but in Empire, you're done. Like these are, you're in love with these characters for the rest of your life. And then obviously the love story here is actually believable.
How is it more believable? Tell us your perspective.
One, because their conversations actually make sense. They talk like normal people talk.
I mean, as normal as you can be when you're like in space with walking carpets and stuff like that.
Yeah. But there was something, because from the beginning, and in A New Hope, there was such amazing chemistry between Han and Leia. Like it was palpable, it was there. And then in this one, it's also because they're more equals. Like Han doesn't look down on Leia, or the other way around. Like, you know, there's banter and everything, but he doesn't, even though Padme was a queen and all of these things, and even though Anakin was way younger than her, he still, when we meet him in Attack of the Clones, he kind of treats her like inferior to him and kind of like aloof about it and distant. And that's not the same as these two that clearly have kind of an antagonistic relationship, but it's because they're attracted to each other. And they're the type of people who don't really necessarily want to show that they can get attached because they're their own person, but they respect that about each other. It's like they can see the attraction, but they respect that they're their own people and capable of doing things on their own. So there's something about it that is just great. And obviously the line, I love you, somebody like Leia, who's like strong and independent and whatever, and she's the first one that says it, I love you, and he's just I know,
she's the vulnerable.
Yeah, I know. And it's so good. It works. And obviously making Han weak there at the end, like making him blind, making him suffer, like being taken back, finally paying for all his, crimes as a smuggler and everything. And in that scene is so perfect, like him being taken down, the freezing, everything, and the despair on Leia's face. And you feel it.
Chewbacca's
You feel
whale,
it.
right? And all that
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
like it frames, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
So,
I don't disagree. I think it's the I wouldn't say the second to Raylo, because Raylo didn't kind of fulfill itself. We got like a little crappy
yeah.
kiss there at the end, just because it was kind of fan servicey, even
Yeah,
though
and then death.
Lucasfilm was trying
And
to
then
have
death.
it like both ways. It's like, oh, it was a brotherly kiss or whatever the hell it said in the book, and she's like, no, it was not. But no, I agree. It was set up. It was set up in a passionate way, with good tension and good dialogue, just like Raylo was, right? Ray
Yeah.
and Kylo had a very strong blooming romance in Last Jedi, which was not paid off as well, I think, in
Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker, because not to get to Rise of Skywalker, so we'll get to that when we talk about those 3 final films. But that was the way to redemption for Kylo. It was like love for Rey. It was like selfless love. That's how you bring how he was supposed to be brought back. And even though you could say that to a degree that's how he did come back, it's not, because
And then you killed
they
him.
don't have yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So no.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need to elaborate, because there we go. But yeah, Empire. What's been said about what hasn't been said about Empire, right? Like everything has been said. It's close to the perfect movie, and I feel the same way that both of you felt when I was watching it as a kid. Not my favorite. Not my favorite. That's for sure. Return of the Jedi. That was my bee's knees. That was the jammy jams. That's the film I had on VHS at my grandparents' house. Every time I went there on Saturdays, that's the movie I would watch all the time. And then Phantom Menace came out, and then that became that movie. But after growing up a little bit, Empire just became the movie, because it's like, oh crap, yeah, there's a lot of things in here. And at the risk of just sounding repetitive, because like I said, you both have said it and everyone has said it, Empire Strikes Back just has everything, man. It's got everything, especially when we look at it, like Mo was talking about at the beginning, from a mythological standpoint of like all the things that are there. You have the hero in his role of trials. You have him go the descent to the underworld, which is like in this case, Dagobah in the cave, the atonement with the father, and like having to confront like his worst fears and his worst enemy. Which what's worse than like you think that the face of evil, which is like faceless because of the mask, and represents like this system that is also faceless because of all the stormtroopers, and there's no humanity behind that. All of a sudden, that evil black faceless thing is your father. It's like it's the person that you wanted to meet all your life, that you want to aspire to, because everyone told you how cool your dad is. So, and then obviously the fact that everyone in the movie loses. Leia loses. Han obviously loses. C-3PO's blown to bits. Luke loses his hand. I think the only person that wins in that movie might be Lando, because he, steals Han's clothes at the end of the film.
Yoda dies.
No, Yoda dies in Return of the Jedi. Don't kill him yet. Don't kill Yoda yet. Come on.
Don't kill Yoda
he's still
yet.
he's got 3 years left before he just disappears. But yeah, I mean, Empire, I love it, but yeah, everyone said what we need to say about it. It's good. It's perfect. And it's perfect because Rick McCallum and Lawrence Kasdan, Rick McCallum being the producer of the film, and Lawrence Kasdan being the script writer of the film, kind of reined George in. And more like you were saying with Attack of the Clones, where in Attack of the Clones, everyone were being like just people to George, just letting him do what he wants. In Empire, they were like, whoa, buddy, reel it in. And you can tell because Irvin Kershner was the director of the movie, Lawrence Kasdan was the screenwriter, Rick McCallum, and not Rick McCallum, Gary Kurtz, sorry. Rick McCallum was the producer in the prequels. I'm sorry about that. Gary Kurtz was the producer in the original trilogy, except Return of the Jedi. They were all people that were kind of like reeling George in to be like, be character focused. Focus on the characters. Have the action boost the story of the characters, and not the other way around. So
And the
I
story
don't know.
is cohesive. Like it's easy, you know what's happening. You can actually follow the story, which in
Yeah.
Attack of the Clones, sometimes you're like, wait, what's happening?
Right,
What are
right.
we trying to do? What is the point of this scene? Like there were so many scenes that looked cool, but didn't really add anything at all to the story. Here in Empire, it doesn't feel like a single scene is wasted. Like everything is
Mhm.
there for a purpose,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
works.
I agree.
So
I
I
agree.
think, I mean, we can't just keep, we love Empire Strikes Back. And like you
Singing
said,
praises
everything
to
has been
the
said.
yeah.
So now the other one that we can't
the
get over
least
either.
the least controversial movie of all time.
Of course.
The movie that came out, everyone's just like, yeah, this is a perfect movie. There's no need to like really criticize it because it's perfect. Everyone loves it. The Last Jedi,
Of course. Yeah. No
least controversial.
controversy at her. Yeah, of course.
None at all. Especially for all the for all the people here and everyone listening. Everyone listening, I'm sure loves it, and especially everyone on Twitter. But let's get
Yeah.
to the meat and potatoes of it. Last time we started with Mo. Nani, why don't we start with you? What do you think of Last Jedi, especially not just as a film on its own, but then how it ties into Rey's journey and the greater, hero's journey mythos that we've been discussing thus far?
So I love Last Jedi. There are a lot of things about it that worked also in Empire, and that's why it's so good, because Empire tried to be different from A New Hope and take the whole thing in a new direction, and Last Jedi did the same thing here. And there is, again, we have the trials, we have the descent, and this time it actually is like going into a womb and you have the actual mirror. I don't know why people criticize that scene so much. I think it's great. And it's not just Rey's journey, it's also Luke towards the end of his life, his journey, because he was victorious in the original trilogy, in A New Hope, he lost in Empire, and then in return, he ended up saving the galaxy. And then now this is post him failing, losing everything, going into hiding, and not wanting to train anybody. So he's battling his own demons as well. So it's like a parallel of both of them. Like Rey is where Luke was in the original trilogy. And now she has this mentor. Luke has basically taken the position of Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan was hopeful and had been protecting Luke his entire life and was trying to maybe keep him away from the conflict until it was obvious that there was no way to do it. And then he still has to train him, but he was a hopeful kind of mentor. And Luke is in complete denial about everything. He just doesn't want to train. He doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to be completely left alone. So he's a completely different type of mentor. So there's so much about it that I love. And then Kylo Ren has become one of my favorite characters, really. And he was kind of really one-dimensional in Force Awakens, like bratty kid who is obsessed with his grandfather, who throws a tantrum at everything. And then we really see him grow here through his relationship with Rey. And you see Rey grow because of him as well, that it's not completely linear. It's not just light side, just dark side. There is an in between, and you can find compassion in the middle. And that one scene when they're right in front of each other and they actually touch their hands, I think it's incredibly well done. It's very reminiscent of that relationship of Han and Leia, that they're kind of opposites, but not really. So there's a lot about Jedi to dissect, but those are some of my favorite things.
I absolutely agree. And one thing that I think I wouldn't say that it's not present, but it's severely lacking in Attack of the Clones is having the rest of the characters that aren't Anakin have a narrative and a growth. Because Obi-Wan goes on an exploration mission, but where he was at the beginning of the movie isn't that much different where he ends up. Same with Padme, like they're not in different places when they end the movie. So those are the big three. So I'm only going to focus on them. Empire, the big three go through a journey as well. Obviously, Luke is the main person, but Han and Leia go through like their journeys as well. And Leia, has the loss of Han. Obviously, Han loses himself. So there's a lot of things that happen to all of the main characters that make them explore, their or re-examine their position in the story. And I think one of the great things about Last Jedi, is that it re-explores that in that sense, where it gives back focus to all of the characters instead of just only the main character, like I thought a Clones did for the most part. And all the characters kind of have like their big moment of catharsis and their big journey that they have to go through. They all have their failure and they have to atone with, from Poe learning like his place in the chain of command, and like why being a trigger happy pilot isn't necessarily the best way to be a leader. Leia, when she realizes that no one responds to the distress beacon. Finn finally learning to fight for others instead of just himself and Rey. And obviously Luke and Rey. I think beyond that, something interesting that Last Jedi does that Empire didn't, which now you just pointed out, is that Kylo Ren also has an arc and a narrative. And he's also in a place where he's going through his own road of trials, where he's re-examining his position in this whole journey and has to not atone, but confront the decisions that he's made. And at the end of the movie, he's a different person than he was at the beginning. So I think that's one of the interesting things of Jedi, is that it pushes everyone's characters forward. Some people might argue that in the beginning of the movie, they're in the same place, that in terms of the conflict that it was at the beginning. But one, no. And then two, sometimes it's more important about where the characters are, because they're the ones that are carrying the story. And if characters don't grow, then the story doesn't really matter. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about Last Jedi, is that really, I wouldn't say subverts, because I think people throw around that word just when something doesn't go the way they wanted it to go. I don't think Last Jedi necessarily subverts expectation. I think it follows the narratives that it needs to follow to make sure that characters develop in an interesting way. But I will admit, I think I've said this before. When I saw Last Jedi for the first time, I was very conflicted with it. I did enjoy it in theaters, but I didn't leave feeling fulfilled. But after rewatching it and like going through it again, it's one of those movies that has really been strengthened in my mind and been like, oh, there's a lot here to really dissect. And it's a movie that's like way more interesting the more you see it, because like there's all these so many little things about it that just make it that much more special. That it's the only, I have a couple of Star Wars posters, but the only Star Wars poster that I have hanging up and framed up is The Last Jedi, because that movie means a lot, and I think has really redefined what Star Wars needs to be moving forward. I think between The Last Jedi and The High Republic, that's the direction that Star Wars needs to go. But Mo, what do you think of Last Jedi? I think you're muted.
Mo.
So for me, The Last Jedi, I think and this might be the reason why some people just don't vibe with it, is that the journey is shifted. Instead of like being an actor that acts, you're a hero for others. Here we see everybody's going through their inner journey. How do I redefine myself given the expectations, given what's happening around me, given everything that I'm learning? You have Rey that's learning about the Force. You have Finn that's learning about what is being somebody that's not part of the brainwashed stormtroopers. You have Poe learning that, hey, you cannot be a gung-ho gunslinger that doesn't follow orders. There's a reason. You have Leia going through both the journey of like, okay, I need to step down from being a leader, but at the same time, it's my son that's out there.
Yeah.
Going through the dark side, and like you all said, and then you have Kylo going through their own journey of like trying to I love like that conflict of forcing like, oh yeah, I'm the dark side, like I'm a monster. It's the idea of like I need to cement what I think I am or what I want to be,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and they're all vulnerable, and I think
Mhm.
that
Yeah, and yet when
separates.
he has the opportunity to kill his mother, he can't.
Yeah, no,
Mhm,
absolutely not.
mhm, mhm.
You can't.
Which is like it's the reverse of Anakin kind of. Anakin is trying to, not become the bad guy, but Kylo doesn't want to become the good guy. He wants to like
Exactly.
force himself to
He
be the
wants to
bad guy, like you
force
were
himself to
saying.
be
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. So
and
keep going.
and no, I think that's a great scene, because you doesn't matter how much you force yourself to be, at the end of the day, if when it comes to your actions, you can say whatever you want, but actions speak louder than words.
Yep.
And that goes for both sides. You can say you're a monster, but if your actions do not portray that, then are you a monster? Or are
Mhm.
you trying
Right.
to just force yourself into that situation?
Yeah.
Um,
In that sense,
this,
and not to cut you off, but in that sense, that's why I think the sequel trilogy is the most meta of the trilogies, because I really do feel, I mean, I don't know if it was intentional or not from the filmmakers, but I do really feel that like Rey and Kylo are proxies of fandom, because for me, like their whole attitudes to like how they're approaching the goals that they want to achieve in the films are very analogous, at least to how I interpret lots of people in terms of how they approach Star Wars itself. Uh, but which I think is very interesting. Like even if it's not intentional, the fact that it has that one-to-one connection, it's very telling, because Kylo, his experience with Darth Vader is the experience he wants to inject into it instead of like the truth of it. And then that experience is what informs what he thinks he needs to do and not what he actually needs for himself. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. Sorry, keep going.
ah, and if anything, this might be the the movie that has the most myth infused into it.
Mhm.
Uh, I think, and it's very, it's it's clearly seen in all of like Rey's stay at the Luke's Island.
Acto or Act Two or whatever
So
the hell you're
whatever,
saying.
yeah. You see, I'm not that kind of nerd. I don't remember names of the planets.
Well, I got you covered. Don't worry.
You're fine. So there you see some Rey coming in with starting with all like being completely naive and not knowing what the Force was. And you have all that scene of like, oh, reach out to the Force and like using the hand and look like slapping, like that's not what I meant. Like,
Yeah.
but then right into Rey's exploring that the Force is not as it's been portrayed. It's not, the Force is not simply black and white. It's not dark and light. It's a grayscale. It's a pattern. And it's probably a prism if you can break those patterns also. And that you need both. I think that's what the whole scene with Rey just descending into the dark hole and going through, like, I love, like, falls on water. It's almost like again going to the rebirth, and you see that the death, you see the monster that's like the skeleton just dead there and coming back, and just instead of looking outside for the answer, Rey looks inside, and that's that whole like mirror scene. It's the I need to reach the end, and nobody else is gonna show me the end except for myself.
I
And
will say before
then
you keep going about the mirror scene that I do love because visually it's amazing, but I hate that she's like narrating it. Sometimes it's like show, don't tell. Just let the viewer go through the journey with her without her trying to say, okay, this is exactly what's happening and narrating it. I think that took away from that scene. So, but anyway, sorry to interrupt. Continue.
yeah, um,
Goose, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was gonna say the Last Jedi is not perfect. God damn it.
It
yeah,
isn't.
Yeah.
It
it isn't.
isn't. There,
Nothing's perfect. And but I think the imperfections can be like it doesn't matter, nothing is perfect, like
Yeah. And it causes
everything.
discussion, you know,
And
everything that you can point out, you know, it causes discussion and gives you an opportunity for when you have another chance to make something, you learn from it all the time. So, I mean, not everything has to be perfect. And I think one of the other things that I wish the movie would have even gone further than it did, like people would have been even more pissed off, but I don't care. I think that it should have stuck to the title and it should have been The Last Jedi. And it's transcending the Jedi. So it kind of upset me that it didn't go all the way through with that. But
especially with the last episode of the Book of Boba Fett, right? And showing how Luke, I mean, because that's one of the things I really appreciated of the last episode of the Book of Boba Fett, which if you guys are interested, we have a full series of episodes talking about each single one of them, where we have fantastic guests that have joined us for that. So please make sure to check those out because they're wonderful. But yeah, in that episode, we see Luke trying to teach his first student, i.e. Grogu, and him trying to be the Jedi Master of old of the Jedi temples from the prequels and kind of repeating those mistakes, which I think it works narratively so that we can see the Luke of Last Jedi. And it's just, he just descends
like he
into the
never
journey
learned
because he's trying to just do the thing that he thinks he needs to do. And I think that's the thing. And we talked about it, we've talked about it a million times. And I think Mo and I have talked about it a billion times even more, about The Last Jedi needing to be the end of the Jedi, and both Luke and Rey acknowledging that the way of the Jedi, even if they wanted to, for marketing purposes, call them Jedi, they still needed to understand that the way that they had been is not the way, and that they need reformation. The Jedi need to change. If they're going to be called Jedi, they need to change. And if we don't want to call them Jedi, then kill the order and make the Skywalkers or whatever new order you want to call it. But it's an order based on attachment, healthy attachment, selfless attachment, the way that Ezra hopefully is doing in the unknown regions with Thrawn. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that, because I totally agree.
And that's the nitpick also that Nani also has with Ahsoka. Like, clearly they all break from the Jedi, and yet just for marketing purposes, because I cannot see any other justification for this. Okay, let's keep with the Jedi. Like, but then I think you also inject to Rey's journey, like that relationship with Kylo. And I think that's where things actually, because they might look as like they're both opposite, but they're pretty much the same. Like they're on the same. Their methods are different, that's for sure, but they're on the same journey. They're diving into their own psyche and trying to understand themselves. And it's the dynamic that they both push each other into that journey deeper and deeper. Like, I mean, no,
which is why I think it would have been so much stronger, right, if they had redeemed Kylo to the power of love, and then the both of them together being like, okay, we have to reject the Sith, we have to obviously reject the Sith, we have to also reject that weird attachment thing of the Jedi, because this trilogy
the Jedi are attached to non-attachment.
Yeah, and what we were discussing, I remember back in the day when we were talking about Luke Skywalker, when that trailer came out, was that the way Luke had won in the original trilogy was basically by rejecting the Jedi Order. Like, he rejects what Obi-Wan and Yoda tell him. They're like, no, you have to kill Vader, and you have to be detached. And like, no, what saves Vader is like a son's love, like his compassion, his attachment to him is what is able to bring down Vader and the Emperor and bring Anakin back from the brink. And I think in that sense, Rey's ultimate, apotheosis to it, right, would have been the culmination of that, and be like, okay, we're gonna embrace that attachment, and what better way to do it than with your partner? And boom, ban Rey, tie it in the Force, even though that's not a thing according to Ty. It's a monad in the Force, where like the two that are one, and then both of them just make a new order of the Force. That's one that's like healthy, and one also that in their health insurance includes mental health checks.
Correct. Everybody in Star Wars needs a therapist.
Yes.
I mean,
but I mean, talking. Yeah,
Grogu.
yeah.
Grogu
Look at Grogu.
got
Grogu.
with her.
Yeah, Grogu's depressed.
Grogu is
Grogu's
depressed.
definitely depressed. Oh
Grogu
yeah.
is depressed.
But going back to Kylo and Rey, which I think it's so beautiful how they're kind of at odds, and then you get that gorgeous scene where they're fighting back to back, and it's.
Passionate. There's fire. and
I
everything
remember
around
that
it.
moment when
Sexy.
they first like turn around and then just like start defending each other. I was like, oh, this is
That's
this is
good.
hot.
It's
This
hot.
is
It's
good.
the
Yeah.
lightsaber battle that I didn't want, but I didn't know I needed. Yeah.
Mhm.
And once I was like, oh, that was good.
Yeah. It's like
Oh,
I
that
That should
definitely
be like
needed
on
that
that
in
should
my
be on
life.
Pornhub or something. It was so good. Yeah.
Shout out to Title for calling it. It is sex scene. It is the
It's
Star Wars
sexy.
sex scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. But now tying all the trilogies together, because I don't want to give too. I don't want to give the impression that we're.
Before we
yeah.
jump out, to anybody who hates how Luke just used the Force to teleport himself
Mhm.
billions of miles in a galaxy and troll Kylo.
That was amazing.
That is the most epic master Jedi thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
No,
And it's part of the expanded universe.
Well, I mean, I remember when it. Yeah,
Like,
it's
just
it's amazing. It's like he just astral projected. He wasn't even there, and Kylo, it's like non-violent, non-everything. And then obviously when he disappears and you see the two suns and the whole thing, it still makes me cry. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's such a
I
good.
People-
scene,
I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, every time I think about it, it's like, oh man.
I don't think that's something else that pisses people off, but I think it was the perfect end to Luke's journey. It was beautiful.
Even though I will be honest with myself, and if I
Uh-huh.
didn't say it, I would be unfair to myself. I didn't want a scenario where Luke lived and was just a mentor to Rey. Like, he's like the Pope that, okay, I'm gonna abdicate, I'm gonna like retire from being the Pope, but I'm gonna be like the what's it called? The Pope Emeritus. I'm the Jedi Master Emeritus. Well, Rey is like the super master and she's establishing, but he's there in a consulting capacity. So he's still there.
No. That scene was so beautiful.
But whatever. But the way, exactly.
You have Force Ghosts. They can all come
Yeah,
back.
True. Very true. Yeah. Very true.
And he was flying. He was levitating.
In Lotus,
Lotus
position. Yeah.
Beautiful.
He had reached enlightenment. It's so good.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And he just transcends and culminates his journey.
Mhm.
Perfect.
It's not Nirvana. It's para Nirvana. It's the last Nirvana.
I don't even know what that is. I'm gonna have to Wikipedia that.
Yeah.
But now tying it all into like all the trilogies, I think one thing that we discussed about Empire and Last Jedi that is interesting is that there's cave scenarios where the main character needs to confront themselves. What would you guys say that's what's analogous to that in Attack of the Clones? What is that cave situation for Anakin? Because we don't have an explicit cave, but what is that like scenario that like has him confront himself? Is it the murder of the Tuscans?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah.
And the subsequent self-reflection of like, oh, I murdered all the kids and children. It's like
I mean, come on, he should feel bad about it.
Yeah, I know, but it's so badly written that it doesn't come through like that regret, that emotion, that turn. Like he committed genocide, and all he can say is, meh. I mean, no,
exactly,
there's no
and
like
Padme's
self-reflection.
Like,
Padme, you could have done better. What the fuck?
She's like, pat on the back. It was like,
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
red
there was no
flags.
outrage, no nothing from Padme. There's no real self-reflection from then on. Like it should have been something that haunted him for the rest of his life, and he just like kind of brushes it off, like, okay.
I mean, it is something.
But
I don't
it's
want
because
I don't want to be the
they're not
actually
human.
person here, but it is something that's brought up. Excuse me, it is something that's brought up in the comics, but you shouldn't have to rely on comics or books for these things. There should be things that should be in the movies, and other media support it. But yeah, it should be in the text. It shouldn't be in the accompanying text. I agree.
But then again, does Anakin have to have a descent, or does Anakin descent comes later on? on the original trilogies.
That's a good point, but I would disagree because he does have Descent because Mortis arc, which by the way, we have a fantastic episode
yeah.
on the Mortis arc,
Yeah.
which you should definitely check out. One of our best ones. Please check it out. But in that arc, he does have like a cave situation, right? When he has like the visions and like he's confronting his dark self and whatnot.
I mean,
So
true.
He's
But
going
that's
through it. Yeah.
but that's completely, nullified by the father at the end of the day. Like just completely wipes Anakin's mind. So he did go through that descent, but I'm wondering if Vader's true descent comes in the Return of the Jedi. When Luke throws away the saber, which is again called back to the Last Jedi. Like the first thing Luke does is throw the lightsaber away. That is what's the last time we saw Luke just throwing the lightsaber away.
Right.
I don't know why people get so pissed about that.
Well, I don't want to like justify them, but I will admit that when I saw that scene for the first time in theaters, I was like, whoa, what's happening here? So I can understand the visceral reaction, but I got over it because I understood the greater, the greater meaning of things. But whatever. Sorry, continue.
Well, so I'm thinking like, I think Vader's or Anakin's journey did end in a full stop for a little while until Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and
that's when we actually see Anakin returning, or perhaps the descent was everything Vader. Perhaps Vader.
That was his entire descent.
It is the entire descent.
So while Anakin is inside Vader, that's his cave, basically.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it makes sense.
He wears his cave. Yeah,
he wears his cave.
I dig it. I can dig it.
Yeah,
I dig it.
I like that.
We'll need to cross check that with Ty to see what she thinks, but I feel it. I feel it. Well, it's a good point. It's a good point, especially when you look at it from how it was framed in Revenge of the Sith with that scene, right? When the helmet comes down on him. And the only way he can be sustained without wearing the helmet is in a little
another
cave or whatever. So good job. Good job. I like what you did there. Yeah.
Oh, it's a team effort.
I'm gonna have to think about it. I'm gonna have to think about it for the rest of the day. It's like, oh shit, Vader, where's his cave?
Where's the cave? I mean, yeah.
I think with that genius comment, we should be done. Actually, right there, because that was perfect.
Until 2024 when we do the third installment.
Yeah, when we come back to do the final part, when we talk about the last three films of by then we might have a new trilogy to talk about.
Who knows? Well, any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, just just make sure to follow that Star Wars Podcast Day 2022 hashtag so you can discover a lot of other wonderful Star Wars podcasts that are out there. But yeah, I mean, for more spicy takes on The Last Jedi, please come back because we love that movie. And if you don't, maybe keep listening to us so you can change your mind or not. Or now we can shake hands and we can go our separate ways, as Journey would say.
Exactly. Plus,
you're like that, didn't you? You were like, oh, you brought a Journey reference.
Well, I think we are done for today. We are Triad of the Force. Remember to like, subscribe, follow us. We are everywhere that podcast can be found. So just search Triad of the Force and you will find us. We have some awesome t-shirts too. Empire Strikes Back. And I guess with that, until next time, we are Triad of the Force. May the Force be with you.